A millionaire widowed father arrives early at his mansion. What he sees leaves him speechless. Michael Harris was 45 years old, a well-known figure in the culinary world of San Francisco. He was a celebrated chef and the owner of a chain of fine dining restaurants, featured on magazine covers, winner of prestigious awards, and praised by critics as a man who could turn every dish into a memory. To many, Michael was the definition of success, talent, fame, and a life so complete that nothing seemed missing. His home stood on a hill overlooking the San Francisco Bay, nearly 9,000 square feet, with massive glass windows pouring in light. Inside, it had everything anyone could dream of: a state-of-the-art kitchen, a luxurious living room, a vast wine cellar, and gardens meticulously cared for. Every detail of the house reflected the precision and excellence Michael had worked so hard to achieve. But behind all the glamour, Michael's true happiness was never in the Michelin stars or the professional accolades. It was Julia, the woman he had met at a concert during his college years. Julia was a music teacher, her hands gentle on the piano keys, her heart even gentler. While Michael was consumed by the kitchen and the pressure of success, Julia reminded him of the value of simple things: a family dinner, an afternoon walk in the park, or simply sitting together to listen to the waves. They married in their mid-20s and had 2 children, Daniel, a lively 10-year-old boy, and Sophie, a 6-year-old girl with bright eyes. Their family wasn't just surrounded by abundance, but bound by rare closeness. Every Sunday morning, Michael skipped meetings to make pancakes for the kids. Each evening, Julia played piano while Daniel and Sophie sang along. The house was filled with the sounds of laughter, the smell of warm desserts, and the cheerful notes of family music. From the outside, Michael's life looked like a perfect picture: a man at the peak of his career, a dream home, and a family overflowing with love. But sometimes the most beautiful pictures are also the most fragile, and none of them could have imagined that one rainy afternoon it would all be torn apart in an instant. That afternoon, the sky over San Francisco hung heavy and gray. Julia was driving Sophie home from ballet class when sudden rain poured down, turning the street slick. At a crowded intersection, a truck lost control and slammed head-on into Julia's car. The crash thundered like it tore the air apart. In an instant, everything changed. Sophie survived with only a few scratches. But Julia didn't. She was gone at the scene, leaving behind an emptiness nothing could ever fill. Michael lost his wife, and Daniel and Sophie lost their mother. The days after the funeral blurred together. The house, once alive with music, now echoed with a silence so sharp it hurt. At dinner, no one spoke. Daniel shut himself in his room, eyes glued to a game console for hours. Sophie, only 6, cried herself to sleep every night, clutching the stuffed bunny Julia had given her. The spacious home became a hollow space, every corner haunted by Julia's absence. Michael tried everything he thought was right. He booked child therapists, paying hundreds of dollars per session. He hired highly trained nannies with degrees in child development. He filled the house with every new toy: interactive dolls, giant Lego sets, even an entire gaming room. But nothing worked. Daniel began losing weight, and Sophie stopped talking to anyone except her old bunny. At dinner, Michael sat alone, watching his children push food around their plates before walking away in silence. What hurt him most wasn't their silence, but his own helplessness. A man who managed an empire of restaurants, who had stood on stages to receive prestigious awards, couldn't do the simplest thing: make his children smile. So he began to withdraw. Each morning he left the house at 6, returning late into the night. He buried himself in work, letting the noise of kitchens and the scent of food drown the emptiness inside. But the busier he became, the colder the house felt. Julia's piano gathered dust, the gleaming kitchen sat unused, and the long dining table turned into a dumping ground for papers and files. Michael found himself asking, "Am I truly a good father, or just a man with money who doesn't know how to love his children?" The answer would come, but not from a therapist, not from a parenting expert, but from a quiet woman who stepped into his home without fanfare. Her name was Isabella Ramirez, 42 years old, a petite woman with black hair pulled back by a simple plastic clip. Each morning began at 5, preparing breakfast for her 3 children before rushing to catch the earliest bus into the city. To Michael, Isabella appeared in his house as nothing more than an employee from a cleaning service he had once used for his restaurants. He needed someone to bring order to a home collapsing into chaos and coldness. Michael barely noticed her the first time they met. His instructions were brief. Start on the ground floor. The kitchen is the priority. He didn't ask her name, didn't care where she came from. To him, Isabella was just there to mop and dust, to restore some sense of control in a world that had fallen apart. But behind the faded blue uniform and worn shoes, Isabella carried a past few people knew. She had once been an elementary school teacher with proper degrees and a deep love for children. For nearly a decade, she taught and nurtured young minds. Then life took a cruel turn. Her husband abandoned her, leaving Isabella alone with 3 children and mounting debts. With no other choice, she left her homeland and came to the United States, hoping to earn enough to feed her children and keep them in school. Her credentials weren't recognized. She took whatever job she could: dishwashing, cleaning, babysitting, waitressing. And yet one thing Isabella never lost was the heart of a mother and the soul of a teacher. She believed caring for a child didn't require prestigious diplomas, but patience, presence, and a love big enough to hold them. In her first days at Michael's house, Isabella was almost silent. She did as instructed, scrubbing floors, washing dishes, folding clothes. But her eyes observed more than dust. She saw Daniel shuffle down the hallway without ever looking up, his eyes locked on a screen. She saw Sophie sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a bowl of cereal gone cold. Dinners in that home were soundless, save for the metallic clink of cutlery on porcelain. What haunted Isabella wasn't the unwashed shirts or forgotten toys. It was the absence of warmth. This grand house wasn't merely messy, it was wilting, like a body without a heartbeat. Isabella understood. Their pain wasn't from a lack of toys or professional care, it was from grief that no one had truly touched, sorrow no one had paused to listen to. And in that silence, Isabella knew that one day she would have to do more than wield a mop. On a Tuesday afternoon, the sky over San Francisco drizzled lightly. Isabella was wiping the kitchen counter when she heard faint sobs coming from the small room next to the kitchen, the place where Sophie often sat alone. She paused, tilting her head to listen. The crying wasn't loud, but it was heavy, like endless drops of water falling without stop. Isabella quietly walked to the door and saw Sophie curled up on the floor, clutching an old stuffed rabbit. In front of her lay a crumpled piece of paper with messy doodles, a lemon cake with a smiling face, beside it 3 stick figures. The girl wiped her tears with her sleeve and bowed her head again, continuing to cry silently. Isabella sat down beside her, her voice as gentle as the wind. "Sophie, what are you drawing?" The girl stayed silent. After a while, she whispered, "I miss Mommy's lemon cake. She used to let me stir the batter. I always spilled it everywhere, but she never got mad. Now no one makes it anymore. No one remembers the recipe." Isabella placed her warm hand on the girl's back. No hollow words, no "don't cry," just her presence. After a moment, she smiled kindly. "Then why don't you tell me about that cake? Maybe we can try to make it again." Sophie's eyes brightened slightly. She began to speak, her voice trembling but filled with memories, the strong scent of lemon zest, the way her mother drew a smiling face with whipped cream, and the times they sang "Happy birthday," even though it wasn't anyone's birthday. Just then, Daniel returned from school. He stopped at the doorway, seeing his sister talking to Isabella, a rare sight since their mother's passing. Isabella looked at him and asked naturally, "Daniel, did you ever help your mom bake?" He hesitated, then nodded softly. "I used to roll chocolate truffles, but I ate more than I made." A faint smile flickered across his lips, the first Isabella had ever seen from him. Isabella suggested, "So why don't we try making a cake of our own today? Not Mommy's cake, because that one is too special, but a new cake, something we'll call our cake." Sophie's eyes widened. "Can I stir the batter?" "Of course, and if it spills, we'll clean it up and start again." Daniel shrugged, but pulled a chair closer to the counter. "I'll take care of the oven." And just like that, an ordinary afternoon turned into the beginning of something entirely different. Isabella pulled an old lemon-patterned apron from her bag and handed a small one to Sophie, a larger one to Daniel, the very aprons her own children used to wear when they were little. The once cold kitchen now buzzed with laughter. Sophie splattered eggs everywhere. Daniel measured sugar wrong. Flour dusted the floor white, even landing on Isabella's nose. But instead of scolding, she laughed wholeheartedly, telling them how her youngest son once forgot to add sugar to a cake, and the whole family had to pretend it was delicious. As the cake slowly baked in the oven, the three of them sat around the kitchen table. Sophie's hair was messy, her eyes sparkling, as she asked Isabella about her childhood and her mother's cooking. Daniel stared at the oven door, watching the cake rise as though guarding a secret. When the cake was ready, the sweet lemon aroma filled the entire house, a scent that had been missing for so long. Isabella carefully pulled it out, and Sophie eagerly drew a smiling face with whipped cream. They cut the cake into 3 pieces and sat together to enjoy it. Sophie took a bite, looked at Isabella, her eyes gleaming. "It's not like Mommy's, but it's still really good." Daniel nodded. "I think Mom would like it too." And for the first time since Julia's passing, the 2 children laughed, not because they were forced to, but because something deep inside them had finally been touched. That evening, Michael returned home, stepped into the kitchen, and froze. He saw his children with whipped cream smudged faces, laughing out loud, while Isabella stood nearby with a gentle smile. The sound of laughter echoed through the kitchen, a sound he thought he would never hear again. Inside his chest, something stirred, as if a part of his heart that had died with Julia was now beating again, all from a simple cake and a quiet woman who carried a heart full of love. From that afternoon on, something had shifted inside Michael's house. No one spoke of it, no formal announcement was made, yet the difference revealed itself in the smallest of moments. The next morning, Sophie walked into her classroom with her hair tied in pigtails, holding a small notebook. When the teacher asked, she beamed and said, "Yesterday, I baked a smiley cake with Miss Isabella." It was the first time in months she had spoken with such excitement. Daniel began to change too. That evening, when dinner was called, he came down on time. Instead of hiding in his game console, he pulled up a chair beside his sister. Michael watched in silence, so surprised he nearly dropped his spoon. That dinner felt different. On the table sat a simple pot of vegetable soup Isabella had made. Sophie eagerly ladled bowls. Daniel laughed about measuring sugar wrong and making the cake too sweet the day before. Isabella smiled, passing slices of toasted bread. Michael said little, but his silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful, warm, full of life. Day by day, the house transformed. Sophie often tugged Isabella into the kitchen, pleading, "What are we making today?" Daniel started asking her advice about recipes, quietly chopping vegetables, setting the table. The kitchen, once cold, now rang with the sounds of knives on cutting boards, the smell of soup simmering, the sweetness of fresh cakes. But not everyone welcomed the change. Sarah, the nanny Michael had hired at a high salary, began to feel her role slipping away. The children listened to Isabella more, sought her out more. One afternoon, Sarah entered the kitchen to find Sophie and Isabella slicing fruit together. She frowned. "Sophie, you shouldn't be in the kitchen with Miss Isabella. That's not her job." Sophie didn't answer, just leaned closer to Isabella. From the hallway, Daniel called out, "We like it here. It's better here." Sarah said nothing. The next day, she left a resignation letter on Michael's desk. "The environment is unsuitable." Michael wasn't surprised. He had already seen that his children had chosen Isabella, not with words, but with trusting eyes and the kind of smiles he thought were gone forever. That evening, as Isabella cleared the table, Michael walked into the kitchen earlier than usual. He pulled out a chair and sat, his voice low and hesitant. "Thank you, Isabella. You've done something I couldn't. You made my children smile again." She froze briefly, then smiled softly. She said nothing more. But in her eyes, Michael saw what no therapist or nanny had ever given: unconditional sincerity. From then on, Michael lingered longer at the dinner table. He didn't just eat quickly and leave. He listened to his children's stories, watched them laugh, and sometimes found himself laughing too. A new habit was forming, unplanned, unforced, simply a family gathering together. The house that had once felt like a mausoleum was slowly coming alive again. The piano still sat silent, but in its place came the sound of chopping, the laughter of children, and the aroma of warm meals filling every room. And in this new rhythm, Michael realized, for the first time in a long while, his house truly felt like home. 1 month after the afternoon of the smiley cake, Isabella hesitated before asking Michael, "This weekend, may I bring my children to visit?" Michael paused, then smiled and nodded. He didn't need to think long. He understood if his children needed Isabella, then they also needed to see her world. On Saturday afternoon, Matteo, Isabella's 8-year-old son, carried a soccer ball along with a small Bluetooth speaker. Clara, her 14-year-old daughter, a high school student, brought along the banana bread their mother had baked that morning. Within minutes, the children clicked like lifelong friends. Daniel and Matteo dashed out to the yard, kicking the ball, laughing, calling each other bro after just a few passes. Sophie tugged Clara into the living room, spreading out all her stuffed animals, whispering, "You be the doctor, I'll be the nurse." Isabella stood on the porch, watching with the quiet joy only a mother could know. Michael observed from a distance, silently. The running feet, the echoing laughter pulled him back to when Julia was still alive, when the house was full of life. Now it had returned, but in a gentler, new way. That evening, as both families gathered around the table, the air was free of awkwardness. Matteo shared stories from school. Clara spoke about school and her dream of becoming a nurse one day. Daniel boasted about a signed soccer ball. Sophie chattered about her stuffed animals. The table roared with laughter. After that day, Michael began to change. He came home earlier, skipped a few evening meetings, silenced his phone during dinner. No one told him to, but in the children's sparkling eyes, he knew why. One night, as they all worked together in the kitchen, Isabella spoke. "I have an idea. What if every Sunday we cooked one of Julia's favorite dishes? A memory dinner." The room fell silent for a moment. Sophie's eyes widened, her voice bright. Mom loved pumpkin soup. She made it whenever it was cold. Daniel added quickly, "And grilled cheese sandwiches, the ones she made when I was sick." Michael sat still, but warmth rose inside him. For so long he had avoided memories of Julia, afraid of the pain. Now he saw them differently, not as replacements, but as ways to continue the love she had started. From then on, a new dish appeared each week. Sophie decorated menus with colored pens. Daniel created a food rating board. Isabella shared recipes from Mexico, weaving them into Julia's dishes. And Michael, for the first time in years, sat at the table with a true sense of belonging, not as an outsider looking in, but as part of a living, breathing family portrait once more. One crisp autumn morning, Michael stood at the construction site of a new project, a community center his company was funding in a struggling neighborhood near the docks. As he studied the plans for the shared kitchen and children's area, one name immediately came to mind: Isabella. That evening after dinner, as the family lingered around the long wooden table, Michael turned to her and said, "There's something I'd like to ask you. It's not like your usual work." Isabella looked up, her eyes slightly uncertain. "What is it?" Michael drew a deep breath. "I'm building a community center. There will be space for children, but I don't want it to be just about letters and numbers. I want it to be a place where kids learn life, where they learn to find their smiles again. And I think you're the one who can make that happen." Isabella fell silent. She placed a hand over her chest, shaking her head slightly. "But I'm just a mother, a housekeeper. I don't have the degrees or the title to lead something like that." Michael met her gaze, his voice steady. "No, Isabella, you did what doctors and experts couldn't. You made my children smile again. You brought life back into this home, and I believe you can bring light to an entire community." Tears welled quietly in Isabella's eyes. She lowered her head, her voice trembling. "Do you really believe I can?" Michael nodded. "I don't just believe, I'm certain." On her first day at the center, the room was bare, just a few plastic chairs and an old whiteboard. But when the children came rushing in, Isabella smiled, opening her arms as if embracing them all. She began with the simplest things, teaching them to bake cookies, organizing group games, listening to their stories about family. She didn't lecture. She taught them how to share, how to listen, how to feel love. From those small sessions, laughter began to echo. Soon the center became a second home for many children who had known loss. Isabella recruited single mothers, overlooked former teachers, giving them work and purpose once again. Michael often stood back, watching with quiet pride. He had once believed building was about bricks and steel. Now he understood. True building was creating a place where hearts could heal. The bond between Michael and Isabella didn't begin with declarations of love or grand romantic gestures. It grew quietly, through small, almost unnoticed moments. One winter morning, as Isabella prepared to leave the house, Michael handed her a thick beige coat. He said softly, "Julia used to wear this when walking Sophie to school. Now? Maybe it's time it keeps someone else warm." Isabella held the coat, her eyes glistening. She said nothing, only nodded gently. Another time, when Isabella caught a cold, Michael, who rarely cooked outside his restaurants, prepared a pot of chicken soup himself. He set it by her bedside without a note, closing the door softly behind him. Yet, with every spoonful of warm broth, Isabella felt the care hidden within his silence. Evenings after dinner often found Michael and Isabella sitting in the kitchen, not to talk much, but to read, sharing a peaceful space. The sound of turning pages, the aroma of warm tea, the quiet companionship, it was enough to make them feel deeply connected. The children noticed it first. One night, Daniel teased, "Dad looks at Miss Isabella like those movie dads do." Sophie chimed in eagerly, "If Miss Isabella were really my mom, I'd be so happy." Michael only smiled. Isabella blushed, but neither denied it. Deep down, they both knew. If this love was real, it would grow in its own natural way. One evening at sunset, after a meeting at the community center, Michael and Isabella walked together through the neighborhood. Golden light filtered through the trees. Michael stopped, looking at her for a long moment. "Do you ever think maybe we didn't meet by accident?" Isabella tilted her head slightly, smiling softly. "You think it was fate?" Michael nodded. "I think some people enter our lives so they'll never have to leave." The world hushed around them. For the first time, Michael reached for her hand. Isabella hesitated for a beat, then placed hers in his. The hand that had held two grieving children, now holding the heart of a man who had lost so much. As time passed, the changes in Daniel and Sophie became undeniable. Daniel, once withdrawn, now joined the school newspaper club. He began writing short pieces about daily life, even proudly bringing home a published article to show Michael. Sophie, who had always been shy, gathered the courage to sign up for the school dance team. To their teachers, it was as if the children had bloomed after a long winter. When asked what had changed, Daniel simply smiled and said, "Because now I have a real home to go back to." That home was no longer heavy with silence. It was filled with laughter, the aroma of warm meals, and the comfort of hugs. Isabella was no longer the housekeeper. She had become the heartbeat of the family. Michael, too, was different. He came home earlier, listened to Sophie's school stories, and carefully read Daniel's writings. Some of the most sacred evenings were spent side by side with Isabella in the kitchen, saying nothing, yet feeling at peace. One chilly autumn afternoon, Michael decided to do something he had been carrying in his heart for weeks. He called the children into the backyard, under the great maple tree that Julia had once loved. On a small wooden table sat a steaming teapot, cookies baked by Isabella, and a small velvet box. Isabella stepped out last, flour still dusting her hands, hair loosely tied back. She looked surprised. "What's going on?" Michael stepped forward, taking her hand. His voice trembled slightly, yet remained steady. "I've thought a lot about what makes a home. Is it 4 walls, a shared last name, a dinner table? For me? It was the first time I saw you wiping Sophie's tears, listening to Daniel, hugging Mateo and Clara like they were your own. You never tried to replace anyone. You simply came and healed us." He knelt down, opening the small box. Inside was a simple ring, not flashy, but filled with meaning. "Isabella, I don't want you just standing beside me. I want you to walk with me, to wake up next to me every morning. I want you to be the woman these children have already called Mom in their hearts for so long." The air stilled, broken only by the rustling of crimson leaves. Isabella raised her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down, not of fear, but of overflowing joy. She nodded once, then again, more firmly. Michael slid the ring onto her finger. Daniel threw his arms around her, shouting, "Welcome, second Mom." Sophie grabbed Isabella's hand, grinning wide. "I've called you Mom in my heart for a long time. I just never said it out loud." In that moment, Michael knew the home he thought he had lost forever had returned, not in the same form, but reborn, overflowing with love. 1 month after the simple engagement beneath the maple tree, Isabella and her children officially moved into Michael's home. The change wasn't only in rearranged furniture, but in the fresh atmosphere that filled every corner. Mateo's room was set next to Daniel's. The two boys quickly became inseparable, doing homework together, practicing soccer, even drafting plans to start a game club in the garage. Sophie bonded with Clara, learning how to braid hair, cooking small meals, and every night asking her to sleep over so they could share bedtime stories. In the kitchen, Isabella hung a small wooden plaque engraved with the words, "Family isn't made by blood, but by love." It wasn't just a phrase, it became the soul of the household. Each time Michael passed by, he paused for a moment, smiling quietly. Evenings around the long dining table were never empty anymore. Everyone had a role. Daniel cooked rice, Mateo set the plates, Sophie folded napkins, Clara helped Isabella season the dishes, and Michael always cleared the table last. Gone were the silent dinners, now replaced with sharing, with stories woven between bursts of laughter. At times, Michael found himself sitting back, simply watching, his children glowing, Isabella's children blending seamlessly, and himself feeling more complete than ever. He realized the house was no longer just his. It had become a true home, where 6 souls together were writing the next chapter of their story. Life after marriage for Michael and Isabella wasn't always flawless. They still had to learn to balance differences, share responsibilities, and face everyday worries together. But it was precisely these simple things that wove a lasting happiness, a true home. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. Each morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, the smell of coffee blending with warm toast. The kitchen lights glowed early, and the dining table was always set for everyone. Daniel and Mateo had become true brothers, studying together, practicing soccer, laughing over jokes only boys would get. Sophie and Clara bonded like real sisters, sharing secrets, decorating their room, and often teaming up to soothe the baby. Then came a small miracle. Isabella gave birth to a healthy baby girl, whom they named Leah. When Michael held Leah for the first time, tears slipped down his cheeks. She wasn't just his and Isabella's daughter, she was the thread that bound every wounded heart together into one family. Daniel declared proudly, "I'll be the best big brother." Sophie kissed the baby's cheek and whispered, "I'll tell you about Mom Julia, so you'll know her love too." Mateo cradled his tiny sister awkwardly but protectively, while Clara sang lullabies in the gentle voice Sophie called the voice of an angel. Evenings often found all 6 gathered around the crib. Michael strummed his guitar, Isabella hummed softly, Daniel and Mateo playfully argued over diaper duty, while Sophie and Clara took turns rocking Leah to sleep. The house, once drowned in grief, now rang with laughter, sometimes chaotic, but always filled with love. One morning, as golden sunlight stretched across the kitchen table, Michael paused to take it all in. Daniel reading his school paper, Mateo practicing kicks in the yard, Sophie and Clara caring for the baby together, and Isabella smiling as she watched it all. He realized happiness was never about perfection. It was about hearts brave enough to love again. The home that had once symbolized loss had now become a sanctuary of love and new beginnings, where 7 souls lived not as fragments of 2 families, but as one. And on some Sundays, when Leah naps and the oven warms the kitchen, they still bake a lemon cake with a little smiley face, just to remember how healing first found its way home.